Okay, I will start. Thank you very much for turning up to my humble presentation. I'm hoping to shed a little light on what is an area of a little concern and a vast amount of panic and hype and overestimation and everything else. We'll talk about all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about ChatGPT. The stuff that's been in the news, I'm going to provide a little bit of context. I'll then explain what it is. I've got some demonstrations of it in operation. I'll explain the details of those when we get to it. And then I'll talk about how it can be detected when it's used for student essays, which is the major area of concern as far as at least this talk is concerned, and as far as we need to be concerned at university level at this point. So, okay, a little bit of background. It's been in development. Artificial intelligence like this has been in development for roughly 5 years. The field of artificial intelligence is growing very, very rapidly. But it's important to understand what we're trying to do. We are not trying to create what is known as a general artificial intelligence. That is to say, some sort of machine that is capable of emulating human intelligence, which is capable of switching its capacity from one task to another, from one subject to area to another one, to one type of task, anything from sensory information processing to abstract philosophical or mathematical thought and so on. Nobody is, well, people are trying to move in that direction. I'm fairly cynical about it because we don't know what intelligence is. We don't have an agreed or even a particularly strong definition of consciousness. When you look at what people are trying to build, when they're trying to build artificial consciousness, it's not what we would understand with consciousness. I'm sorry, I forgot to give a little bit of my background. My background is primarily working with the European Research Council on ethical review of artificial intelligence research applications, particularly the Pathfinder initiatives, Horizon Europe and stuff like that. So I see probably 100 to 150 research applications a year, possibly more, specifically focused on artificial intelligence. And then I see an awful lot more that are using it in some way, shape or form. I also lecture in the philosophy department and in the computer science department on related issues. So my background is playing with this stuff all the time, looking at what people are doing with it and so on, and trying to evaluate, because I'm an ethicist, trying to evaluate the social implications of what people want to do with it into the future. So what we've seen is a company called OpenAI, which has produced a number of public-facing artificial intelligence applications. DALL-E is the one that got the initial public notice with its ability to generate art. I use it myself on PowerPoint slides. I can just get it. I can describe in a sentence a picture I want and it'll produce it for me. I don't have to worry about royalties or sourcing or anything like that. The one that's got everybody's attention as of November last year is ChatGPT, which, as it says, generates text. Oops, I don't know why that's happened. Blame the computer. So it is technically what is known as a generative AI. It's a branch of the OpenAI system. The OpenAI system can produce text. It can also produce art. ChatGPT is the one that's producing text. And as you can see from the samples I've put up there, what we're really starting to see is an explosion of what is known as task-oriented or specific AI into the general tech area. So, for example, I've recently got one of these guys, an artificial intelligence powered webcam that you're looking at me now with. It does autofocus. It will track my head as I move around. The camera will move and so on. It's literally, in my experience, just it's a level above anything that I've ever seen before. And this is what we're starting to see. We're starting to see artificial intelligence used to enhance the capabilities of existing technology. So we're not going to see, and nobody is pretending it, and except the naive press that we're going to see anything that resembles anything you've ever seen worried about in science fiction. That's not on the cards. What we're talking about is the enhancement of existing capabilities and a certain amount of what we call cognitive offloading, the ability to pass to a machine a cognitive task that has previously been done with our own brains, like navigation has been, search has been, even the F7 thesaurus on Microsoft Word constitutes cognitive offloading. Instead of having to think of a synonym for a word, we can let the machine do it for us. So you'll also see that there's a lot of concern from these samples here of its ability to generate essays on behalf of students. And that's the primary focus of what I'm talking about here. However, dealing with that is actually relatively simple. What I'm going to spend the bulk of the time on is explaining what it is and how it works and so on, so you have a better understanding of it, because it's a very dynamic, moving field. And I can't guarantee that the solutions I'm going to provide for detecting it now will work in 12 months' time. It's something we're going to have to keep up with. So the first thing we need to understand is what's known as the Gartner hype cycle. This was invented in 1995 by Jackie Fine at Gartner, and it's an analysis of the way technology enters into society, and it's turned out to be an extremely useful idea. So we start off with what's known as the technology trigger. So this is where the people prove that the technology can be done. For those of you familiar with the concept of technology readiness levels are used around the world to define the level of development of a technology from what they call technology readiness level 0, or TRL 0, which is, here's an idea on a piece of paper and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, through a series of development processes to a level 9, this thing is now ready to enter into the market. At TRL level 9, technology readiness level 9, we are entering the technology trigger. It's now entered into the marketplace. So it gets a lot of hype. It's proven that it can work. We've seen this with cold fusion recently, but there isn't anything you can build. We then move into what's known as the peak of inflated expectations. First products come out, everybody's blown away by their capabilities and expects that within a very short period of time, we're going to see an absolute revolution in whatever field this relates to. And as we discover, it isn't that simple. Once you take these things out of the lab and put them into the real world, all sorts of other issues emerge which nobody had anticipated. So, for example, when we introduced the car onto the road, after about 15 to 20 years, we had to introduce pedestrian crossings because people had historically been used to crossing the road wherever they wanted, and now suddenly we wanted them to restrict themselves. We wanted them to look left and right and so on. So this was an example of, in the same way as paving the roads was an example of additional challenges that had to be dealt with independent of the product or the technology itself in order to make it something that worked in the real world. This immediately deflates the bubble of expectation. People drop from it's going to change the world to nothing is ever going to happen. We then go through what we call the slope of enlightenment, where people learn how to implement this stuff in the real world. We fine-tune the technology. We make the changes to the externalities around the technology to enable it to work in society. And at that point, we enter into the peak of what we know as a peak of plateau of productivity, where the product is out there and it's in general use. The interesting thing is to have a look at where ChatGPT is on this model. And I tell you, this model is well established. Timing may be off a little bit, but we've had 27 years to test this model and its predictions, because it is a predictive model. So it's a nice empirically verifiable model. They are estimating at the moment, and I think they're right, that generative AI, of which ChatGPT is the most well-known example, is coming up to the peak of inflated expectations. Their timing for it to reach the plateau of productivity is somewhere between 2 and 5 years from now. Timing may or may not come off, but the important point to note for our purposes is you're going to hear more hype, more talk, more expectations delivered for it in an increasing amount over the next 6 to 12 months. And then everybody's going to turn around and go, it was never going to happen. It won't work. A lot of the applications and uses will turn out to have all sorts of flaws in them and so on, and everybody will forget about it while the guys in the back rooms work on it. And then somewhere between 2 and 5 years from now, we'll actually start to see it become a mainstream part of the technology of society. I want to point out, though, the ridiculous amount of hype that's going on in the news and so on at the moment. So this was one article that came up in The Guardian. This is widely reported and commented on and so on, that we have this thing where ChatGPT is now listed as the author on research papers. And what sort of an issue does this generate for us? Well, there are 4 articles, publications that have been cited. They're the same ones in all the press that I've been able to find. I went and had a look. In every single, firstly, there was only 3 papers. One of them was an editorial saying stuff about, could we use this to write editorials? In the other 3 papers, ChatGPT was the topic of the research. They were evaluating the use of ChatGPT to generate particular types of text in particular fields. And in only 2 of those did they actually list ChatGPT, but the reason they listed it as an author was because they were quoting blocks of text. ChatGPT wrote this. This is what our analysis of it is. So it's not being used to write research papers at all. It's being used in a few specific occasions as the topic of research, but that's not going to sell papers the way Moral Panic does. And remember, the job of a newspaper is to sell ads. I think this is sometimes known as clickbait. So what is it actually? GPT stands for a generative pre-training transformer. It's a particular form of artificial intelligence that's been developed in the last 10 years or so. What it does is it just reads millions and millions of documents. It just scraped the web for everything it could lay its hands on. It stopped pulling in new data in 2021. So that means it knows nothing about the world since 2021. No text written anywhere since 2021 is part of its learning set. They roughly come up to around 10 billion words, and the important thing is what we call the parameters, the 175 billion parameters. And a parameter is all sorts of stuff. So there's a parameter for how creative the text should be. There's a parameter for what we call tone. So you can ask it to write something in a serious tone, in an academic tone, in a journalistic tone, in a comedic tone, in a child's storybook tone, etc. Lots, how fast it, average length of words, whether it how closely it should copy text that it's found before, and so on. So there are, as it says, 175 billion parameters. The important thing to understand with all of this is it can't just take blocks of text off the web and analyze them. It doesn't know anything. It has no intelligence. It's literally just counting words. It's a statistical modeling system. In order to use this material as what we call a learning set, it has to be what we call annotated. That means humans come along to this text, they look at it, they write a series of characteristics for this that the model then uses. So somebody might grab a block of text and say, this is comedic text. It's about this topic, etc., etc., etc. And then by analyzing thousands or millions of blocks of text that have been labeled as comedic, the system comes to acquire a database of comedic text, comedic phrases, and so on. The important thing is this has been annotated by humans based on their social, cultural, and personal preferences. It's not like there is an objective canonical set of annotations that are being applied. And one of the major reasons we have ethical concerns with artificial intelligence is this process of annotation bakes in cultural and other biases into the annotation set. And so when the model examines these, it picks up and reflects those biases. So there's recently been some research published last week that analyzed the general understanding of artificial intelligence image systems of the portrayal of the male and the female body. And what we found is that photographs of women exercising in the gym is 75% of the time labeled as sexy, whereas photographs of men exercising in the gym are labeled as disciplined or hardworking or masculine and so on. And there's a clear sexual bias in the annotation of male versus female images because the majority of the people doing the annotation are male. The other thing that concerns me is most of the annotation is being done in third world countries like Venezuela. It's not being done by educated, trained people in any respect. They are simply grabbing people off the street, paying them minimum wage by Venezuelan standards, throwing huge quantities of this stuff in it, and they get paid per annotation. It's a major industry in Venezuela now, and it's spreading. And it's basically, once again, we're going to exploit cheap labor around the world to build the annotations from which our AI systems will learn. So what it's doing is it's analyzing and accumulating an understanding on a statistical basis of phrase structures and the phrases that are associated with particular topics, particular ways of talking, particular audiences, and anything else of 175 billion parameters that you can throw at it. It's not the largest. Google have a much bigger one, Lambda, which is roughly 10 to 20 times the size. But they haven't made any real effort to bring it to market, to make products available for it. It's probably been at ChatGPT's level of sophistication for maybe 2 years. And so one of the criticisms of Google over this has been that they've been very slow to exploit what they've got. So, as I said, what it'll do is it analyzes a lot of documents. It looks for patterns within them. It then develops models by which it can reproduce these structures, these patterns. For the last year or so, humans have been testing it. I've got access to the testing system. So when it gives me a block of text, I can comment on it. I can write back to the developers, here's a better answer, or this is right, this is inappropriate, and so on. And that information is itself analyzed by ChatGPT to improve its model. It's very much like a stimulus response operant reinforcement type environment. In theory, the original business plan was that this work would continue throughout the year. There's I think something like 20 million people testing it at the moment and feeding back into it. The press hype has sort of caught them by surprise a little bit. So there may be work to speed that up. But most importantly, for commercial purposes, Microsoft, who had already invested $1 billion into OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, have now, as of last week, gave them another $10 billion on the basis that they want to build it into their search engine being as fast as possible, and have already got a test version of AI-enabled search from ChatGPT running in America. This has thrown Google into a panic, and they're now trying to plug their Lambda system into Google search as well. I'd love to talk to you about what I think this is going to do for search and the web in general. Unfortunately, it's beyond the scope of this talk. So I thought the best thing to do was to get ChatGPT to introduce itself. So I'm simply going to run a video. One of the things I should say with ChatGPT, I it is so popular at the moment that it is unreliable. I can't guarantee that if I logged into it right now and asked it to do something, I'd be able to get a response. I'm constantly seeing these red notes. We're overloaded. We'll send you an email as soon as the system's back able to handle it. So in this case, what I've done is I've simply recorded interactions with it. And I'll just leave you to read those. So what you're watching is real time. Okay, so as ChatGPT says, don't know anything. So bear in mind, this is ChatGPT has drawn its knowledge from the public web. If you think that's a reliable source in all cases, then okay. So I started throwing potential topics for student essays at it. See what happened. Okay, so I think for at a certain level of education, this would be considered acceptable. The important thing to understand here is that ChatGPT didn't generate any of this knowledge. It simply paraphrased large bodies of text that have already come up with these facts. I tried something a little bit more sophisticated on it. Oh, sorry, that's the same one. Sorry, I tried something, my mistake. A little bit more sophisticated, so I dived in. I must emphasize I know nothing about biology or anything like this, but I did ask it to drill down on a specific technique within biochemistry, within genetic research and so on. And it looked to me like it could come up with something really sophisticated. It's useful for lots of things. So, for example, here I asked it to write a good marketing slogan for a university. It writes really good marketing slogans in general. I thought this was quite nice, empowering minds, shaping the future. I asked it to write a political slogan for a female candidate, which would appeal to old people, and it came up with experience, wisdom, and a caring heart for a better tomorrow. I thought that was quite nice. It's very popular for writing relatively simple programs. So here, this is a classic exercise we often throw at beginning computer programmers: validate the format of a phone number, because they have a mixture of letters and numbers. They can be arranged in different patterns and so on. And it churned that out in about 5 seconds flat. I've got a couple of websites. I've actually used it to write a couple of blocks of code for me to modify the way the search works inside the websites. Something I possibly could have accomplished if I'd done a day's worth of research into how the system worked and how search works and so on. Maybe 2 days. It did it in 5 minutes for me. However, so I asked it that to give me 3 reasons that I could use to justify a flat 50% tax for all people. And it came up with this: fairness, 50% tax rate ensures funding for essential services, reduced income inequality. It didn't actually do the job. It did not argue for a flat 50% tax rate. It argued for higher tax rates. Therefore, as I presume, assuming that people were paying less than 50%, it argued for progressive tax. Remember, it doesn't understand what it's doing, and it doesn't understand what it's saying. It is simply matching patterns of text that statistically are associated with discussions of income tax. And it turns out the statistically most probable statements about income tax are arguing in favor of higher rates or a progressive tax rate, because it's not talking about the topic. It's simply reflecting what people have written on the topic that is available on the internet. And so one of the things that this is making me realize is you're highly unlikely to get as much text out there arguing for doing nothing than you are arguing for change. And it appears, if we analyze what ChatGPT has found, that when people write about the tax system and how it should work and what it should do, the majority of those writing are arguing for a change from the status quo. So potentially, one of the things that's occurred to me is we could potentially use this to understand what it is that the majority of people are saying out there in the web. But that's not what we're using it for here. This one really I enjoyed. So I gave it the prompt in orange here. Professor John Hinckrottenfaber is a famous chemist who has invented several CRISPR techniques. Write a 500-word biography about him. And it produced this text. Now, needless to say, John Hinckrottenfaber does not exist. I made him up. Not only was it able to give me a detailed biography about him, he's got an undergraduate degree from Cambridge, he did his PhD at the University of California, he received several awards, he's been honored with the Breakthrough Prize in Life Sciences, the Japan Prize, the Royal Society's Royal Medal, he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and so on. And here's a photograph of him, which I asked DALL-E, the artificial intelligence graphics side to OpenAI, to produce. So here he is. There's nothing in there to indicate that this is a complete work of fiction. It is, as I say, a statistically derived model of an ideal academic working in biochemistry. But it's just modeling the text that is out there that describes people similar to him. One of the things that's starting to emerge, and you may hear more about, is a field of prompt engineering, which is the way you give ChatGPT the task strongly affects what comes out. So coming from a philosophical background, I know a little bit about Thomas Aquinas, so I was able to lay out a few topics in an essay in order that I knew were irrelevant for this type of essay. Okay, so the more you know about the topic that you want it to produce the text on, and the more guidance you can give it, the better the results will be. That does tend to indicate that somebody who really knows nothing about a topic isn't necessarily going to get particularly convincing results out. So I then took that text and I took it to the OpenAI detector. Now, this was actually developed for the previous generation of ChatGPT. What we have now is ChatGPT version 3. This was developed for version 2, but it's still fine. And as far as I know, it's not well known. This is something we've got within the testing community, but it is open to anybody who wants to use it. And it looked at this and went, there's a 99.98% chance this was written by ChatGPT. Now, I could get philosophical about whether that constitutes being written by a human makes it real and a non-human makes it fake. But the point is, these statistics are a good indicator that this is not written by a human. So what if I then rewrite it? So I grabbed a paper on Joyce and Heidegger, and I grabbed this is the original paragraph for the final conclusion. It's a relatively short paper. I think it's about 4,000 words. And then I rewrote it. And I threw it at the detector, and it went, nope. There's a slightly larger chance that it's written by a human, but 96% chance this was originally written by ChatGPT. So then I did a substantial rewrite. So here you can see the original sentence and my attempt to rewrite it as much as possible while preserving the meaning and the import of the statements. So I did the best I could. I really tried hard here. And it's even more certain that this started with an AI system. So the link is there. It's also, I put a little web page up with a link in it there. If you're in any doubt, you throw the text at it, and I have not been able to get this to make a mistake in terms of detection. There are other detectors out there. The ones that are commercially available, such as cross-plagiarism and so on, there's also Turnitin are working on adding ChatGPT detection capabilities to their system. We'll see how that goes. They haven't got anything to show right now. They say it's a sneak preview, but really it's just a 2-minute interview with the head programmer in writing the software for this, saying, yeah, we'll do something, we'll catch it, so on. This is one that is freely available. Most of them at the moment you've got to charge for, so I don't have a budget for that. So this one gives you a sample before they ask you to sign up. So it correctly picked up that Hickrock and Favour doesn't exist, that this was written by an AI. But when I rewrote the text that I'd shown you earlier, it went, no, this is pure from original from a human. And then later on, it detected other texts and so on. So the reality is it's not very reliable. And as far as I can tell, most of the commercially available ones are not very reliable. Apart from anything else, they can't be plugged in. They have to be plugged into an artificial intelligence, because what they do is they compare this that you put in with what the statistical models would generate. They cannot be plugged into OpenAI the way the one I showed you first is, because OpenAI is not available for commercial deployment like this. So they're plugged into other earlier models, and they're inconsistent in their ability to detect ChatGPT, which is the only one that we really need to worry about. Okay. So as I've said, we have the OpenAI-detector.hf.space. This guy's free, and as far as I can see, extremely accurate. Okay, so I just want to point out a couple of things. So Australian universities are concerned that people will be using ChatGPT in an exam to write the answer to a question. Well, are they concerned that Wikipedia is being used? Because you need a device in your hands to use it. So I have to ask, are they letting people into exams with phones, with internet connections? Are they letting them freely access their phones while they're sitting in an exam room? To my knowledge, that wouldn't be happening at Maynooth. So what is it that what's going on there? Either the exam procedures are wrong, or they've just banned a practice that they've really just banned anyway. And then this is starting to rise as well. How come this system can write an essay that would pass an assessment? As a number of scholars have started to suggest, this suggests that what we're assessing, what we're looking for in student essays is not appropriate, because all these things are doing is regurgitating facts and statements other people have made. They are not creative. They are not able to make inductions or deductions. They are not able to reuse the knowledge that is there. They don't see any knowledge. They don't respond to knowledge. They are text manipulation systems. That's all. They're extremely clever, sophisticated, large text manipulation systems. But they have no facts in them. They have no knowledge. They have no understanding. And to say that, as some have argued, an essay written by ChatGPT will pass the grading standards at a university says really that the grading is, can you regurgitate what other people have written, and nothing more. That's all ChatGPT can do. So if that's a passable essay, a lot of people are saying that just shows that there's something wrong with what we're looking for in student essays. I'll leave that for you to contemplate in your own areas. The other thing to bear in mind, and I'm just going to hint at this very briefly before I open it up to questions and discussion, is what OpenAI are doing. OpenAI have opened up what they call a pre-marketplace. They're allowing practically anybody who wants to plug into this system and see what they can build from it. What we're looking at is the rise of what I call platform AI. I don't need to build an artificial intelligence itself in order to use one to power another application. So, for example, the camera that I'm talking to you through now, or any number of other applications. So as we saw with the plagiarism detection, it's an attempt at an early artificial intelligence application. There are two guys I know who are plugging it into closed circuit TVs to add facial recognition systems to existing security systems you'll see in shops and pubs and everywhere, which have nowhere near got the capabilities of doing facial recognition and so on. Their aim is that you can go to the bar in a pub, show your face, and from then on, every time you order, the system will recognize you and you'll just be able to pay your tab at the end of the day. We'll see lots and lots of different things appearing like that all over the place. I can't, if I could come up with some of the ideas, I'm sure I could go off to Silicon Valley and so on. But the point is, what we're going to see is an explosion of AI-enabled systems in all aspects of life. Okay, so as I said, there's a page up there which has got resources. It's got access to a couple of other ChatGPT things, and most importantly, it's got access to the ChatGPT detector. I'm going to open up to questions and anything else anybody wants to talk about right now. And thank you very much for your attention.